that, I will turn us over to Matt and his fabulous socks.
And my fabulous socks. Okay, so have we talked about? I guarantee we have, but have we talked about external versus internal shame? Did I do that recently?
I don't think so.
Really? Okay, so it was one of those things because I always sit and go, man, I wonder if we should talk about this, or I wonder if we should talk about that. And external and internal shame. So one of the biggest blocks that we have in relationships, one of the biggest blocks to having empathy, for having compassion with each other, one of the biggest blocks for preventing defensiveness in relationships is going to be our shame. But one of the things we don't understand, so meaning my shame, let's say you and I are having a conversation and you're like, Matt, I hate your socks. And I'm like, oh, I'm such a failure. My socks are terrible. And I know I'm being kind of silly as I talk about that. But like, if we're having a conversation and I'm taking it personal and I'm shutting down, I'm no longer able to engage empathetically and compassionately because now I'm focused on the fact that I feel like a failure. That would be internal shame, because it is shame that I am creating within myself about myself internally. Now, most people understand that. Most people are really good about understanding internal shame. The interesting thing is you have external shame, and when I first learned about it, I was a little bit confused. But external shame is where, let's say Scott says something to me and I don't feel like I'm a failure, but what I hear him saying to me is that I'm a failure, and I shut down and get defensive because I'm like, how dare you, Scott? You can't call me a failure. I refuse to listen to your garbage. I'm not a failure. And now I'm shutting down because I'm perceiving that he's shaming me. So that would be external shame. It doesn't necessarily mean that in that moment I'm feeling it internally. I'm feeling it externally, and I'm shutting down compassion, empathy, and I'm going into defensiveness because I'm perceiving external shame. Now, the interesting thing about shame is that in order to experience it, I have to be the one that is internalizing it or externalizing it, for that matter. With the exception that if Scott were to say to me, you are an unlovable person, right? That would be a moment where I would be like, oh, well, you are trying to shame me, and I'm not going to let you because I believe that I'm lovable, and I don't know why you're being Captain Rude today. We know, of course, that Scott wouldn't say that, but most of the time when we engage in conversation with people and our shame gets triggered, most of the time, I believe it is not intentional. The other person is triggering our shame. It's coming up for us either internally or externally and blocking our ability to stay curious and to stay empathetic and to stay compassionate. So, yes, there are times where people intentionally try to shame us. Brene Brown talks about that the fastest way to motivate another individual is to use shame to threaten their lovability. If I, for instance, say to Scott, I don't know why you're my punching bag all the time, Scott, but I hope you enjoy it. If I say to Scott, unless you're on time to our webinars, you don't love me, and I know that you don't care about me, and that you aren't a lovable person, something like that. Now I'm trying to...
I feel like I'm being externally shamed.
I'm sorry. That was awesome.
Just putting it in perspective for everyone. I'm not internalizing that.
It wasn't intentional. Yes. And if I were to do that, it would be me trying to motivate him to be on time, even though obviously there was a mix-up today, which is no big deal, in an effort to change his behavior. I could very much love him and care about him and try to change his behavior because I want to see this positive response happen, but still be using such a damaging tool as shame. But I believe most of the time in our relationships, shame is something that is experienced without intention. And I've found that people who are steeped in shame don't know how to recognize that the either external or internal shame is still theirs to own, right? If somebody says you're shaming me, my response is, really? Tell me more about why you're feeling that way. Because it's theirs. I can't own, unless I'm truly shaming them, I can't own that they're feeling it. That's their experience. So shame is an amazing thing that really blocks us as couples or in any other relationship we have from connecting and empathizing with each other. So I thought it'd be a fun thing for us to talk a little bit about. So what do you got, Scott?
There we are. So I want to take shame and put it into the context of a relationship where one partner has been cheating.
Oh, God.
And of course, we have the betrayed partner who's angry and maybe using shame as a motivating tactic. You're such an awful person, no person who was, worthwhile would ever cheat on, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes the cheating partner will spit it back. Well, if you weren't like this, I wouldn't do that.
Right. If you had been more lovable, I wouldn't have cheated, right?
Right.
Whatever.
So first of all, what happens when shame is used as the tool to motivate by the betrayed partner, and then what happens when it's the retaliatory tool from the cheating partner? What happens to the dynamic, and how can that be overcome?
Well, I mean, here's my gracious assumption, right? Because I talk a lot about that on here. My gracious assumption is if somebody is engaging in the relationship, so if I'm having a confrontation with somebody, that's the best word. If I'm having a confrontation with somebody and they're using shame as part of the conversation, the gracious assumption is that other person is trying to connect. That other person is trying to get close to me, right? And it may sound really weird if I'm a betrayed partner saying to a spouse who has cheated, what did you say? It was good.
No self-respecting husband would ever cheat on a loving spouse. What is wrong with you?
You totally genderized that cheating partner.
I sure did, didn't I?
Yes. No respecting husband, no respecting wife, no respecting spouse would ever cheat. If you really loved me, you wouldn't do this, right? And in that case, it may sound crazy, but to the person who has cheated, your spouse is trying to connect. Your spouse is trying to work through their pain. And so though the shame isn't okay, it's not a healthy tool, we have to, as much as possible, recognize that that person is trying to connect. And people will often ask, well, how do I know? Well, you know that they're not connecting anymore when they're gone, right? When it's, I don't mean this in a bad way, when it's like, okay, we're done, let's sign the divorce papers and move on, right? Like, they're not trying to connect at that point. But even in confrontation, even in moments of shame, the person is trying to draw the other person close. And this sounds a little absurd, but it's true. We are trying to let the other person know we're hurting. So when you ask what needs to happen, whether it's the betrayed partner or the cheating partner or the person struggling with the addiction, whatever it is that we're dealing with here, whatever the betrayal is, we have to stop and recognize that this is even if it's a terrible way, this is the person's attempt of trying to bring closeness in the relationship, trying to work through their hurt and pain. So the best thing to do is to stop and kind of call it out and say, hey, I'm feeling shame, right? The person feeling the shame, or whether it's internal or external, needs to stop and say, hey, this is what's coming up for me. Just like you did earlier, and say, hey, Matt, I'm feeling some external shame. And I'm able to go, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're telling me, right? Let's slow this.
What if I'm angry enough at you that I want you to feel shame?
Right? And so so in this case, I'll suggest that I'm the person struggling with addiction and you're angry enough at me that you want me to feel shame. as much as possible, I'm not saying this is easy, I'm going to be able to go, you know what? I don't blame you for wanting me to feel shame, because your hope is that if I feel shame, if I hear pain, if I feel pain, if I feel shame, that I might be able to recognize how much you're hurting. And if I can recognize how much you're hurting, maybe you can that you can see that I love you and I care about you, right? So you're shaming me because you're trying to get your pain out. You're trying to get your hurt out. Now, it's not effective, ultimately. Um, it needs to move to a more vulnerable place of hurt and pain. But even if it's not, I can recognize as uh, the betraying partner that you are trying to connect with me and you don't know any other way than to shame me. Did that answer that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because but the natural reaction, I'm going to flip it now. I'm receiving this intentional shame from you, my partner, because you're that angry, and
Correct.
I'm not capable of responding that way in the moment because shame is so overwhelming for me, that I either shut down or I shoot back with shame. Right? You gained 10 pounds. I don't find you attractive anymore. Of course I cheated.
Right. No,
I mean, that's horrible, but
it is the natural response to fight back with defensiveness. Now, I say it's the natural response. Every person's going to be a little bit different. Some people have a natural response to fight back. Some people have a natural response to run out the door. Some people have a natural response to just freeze and hold still, right? Those are what we would refer to as some limbic responses. And so I am talking about this in some ways that is like on a superhuman level, right? And when I say superhuman, I really don't think it's beyond the capability of any of us to learn how to do this. But you better believe that I'm talking about this from somebody who is able to ground, who's able to breathe, who knows how to use their tools in the moment of confrontation, has spent time contemplating how much my spouse has been hurting, has spent time understanding that shame is a response that occurs when they are in pain and when they're trying to have me see them. They don't feel heard. They don't feel understood. And so when they're coming at me, I'm working really hard to check in my shame and check in my automatic response and not react impulsively. You guys have heard me say you want to slow down enough to figure out what you're reacting to. Do not react until you know what you're reacting to. Obviously, moving in with a gracious assumption every time. So it is not easy and takes a lot of work, not only on the part of the betrayed partner, but on the part of the betrayer. And the betrayer is usually somebody who's had shame their whole lives, and they just live in constant shame. The number of betrayers I've worked with who are like basically tell me that shame is a constant state, that when they got out of shame, they felt weird, like something felt wrong. And it was like, yeah, you're learning to feel guilt instead of shame. And they're like, but it almost feels like I can't, like, something's wrong, and that, like, it's not healthy to think that what I did was bad. I have to think that I am bad. And helping them even realize that the state of shame is not normal. It's not okay. But they don't even know that. It would be like saying to somebody who's been in a body of water their whole life, hey, you can get out and get dry. And they're like, this feels weird. I'd rather be in the water.
yeah, I want to point out a couple of things, and I want to ask another question. So, when Matt talks about the fight, flight, freeze, I always call it the lizard brain. That's the oldest part of the brain, and lizards have it. We have it. Every animal has it. But then there's another layer that's the midbrain, and like cats and dogs have that. And then humans, we have also the prefrontal cortex, this outer layer, which is the executive thinking part of the brain. And to get from the lizard brain when our shame is triggered to the prefrontal cortex, it takes work. I mean, it takes some effort.
Oh
And we
God.
have to be on a webinar like this to hear Matt talk about pause, breathe, think about what's really going on. You know, we're learning how to do this. And I applaud you all for being here and learning how to do this, because the lizard brain wants to be in charge when the lizard brain wants to be in charge. And it's hard to kind of tamp it down and take it to a higher level.
Totally.
So, yeah. So my question is, most of us, all of us all of us carry some shame.
Absolutely.
And I call them shame buttons. My mother installed them. She was very good at it. And they're very sensitive. And even today.
And most likely they were installed because she wanted to see you have a particular type of life and was trying to motivate you in that direction.
Right. She wanted me to be a certain person, and I didn't always fit that mold. So I have shame whenever I didn't fit that mold. And
Right.
and if somebody even like breathes on these buttons, it kicks in full force, and it's post-traumatic stress. I get it. I know I have PTSD, but it is awareness of the fact that these buttons don't have anything to do with you or the person that I'm talking to right now. Does it help to know that, or do I still experience the same reaction? How do I deal with that? And can I ever get rid of those buttons?
That is such a good question. In my opinion, I think overall, I usually tell people, I think we can lessen the intensity of those buttons. We can lessen the reaction of those buttons, if that makes sense. But the truth is, anytime any of us get worn down and aren't doing our dailies very well, we're not doing self-care very well, we're stressed, we're overworked, when we're out of balance, then I think those shame buttons become much more sensitive. I think we can get to a place where they have minimal effect. I don't know that that we can truly get to a place where they're non-existent. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it would be unrealistic for us to expect them to become non-existent, to be healed in such a way that they don't exist.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I've been working on these for years and they're still there.
I think we're all better off almost like recognizing that those are there, and in some respects they can serve a good purpose. And I try and teach people, like, learn to repurpose those buttons. And when those buttons get hit and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm feeling a lot of shame, it's like a smoke alarm. You'd never want to get rid of a smoke alarm, right? People are like, well, but what if it's chirping in the middle of the night? Well, it's chirping in the middle of the night because the battery needs replaced. It doesn't mean you want to get rid of it. That's dangerous, right? So you need to, unfortunately, get up, replace the battery. And if it goes off, you're going to be like, oh, I'm so grateful. It might be saving my life. Or it might just be telling me I burnt the toast. But ultimately, we can reframe or repurpose those shame buttons to help us realize, hey, my shame's coming up heavier than normal. I think I'm out of balance. Now, keep in mind, this applies both to somebody struggling with addiction and partners and anybody. The only potential exception is, maybe somebody who's sociopathic, and that doesn't mean they're a bad person. But yeah, I mean, this is, I think, important for all of us to realize that the shame buttons can be reprogrammed in a way to serve another purpose.
Yeah, that actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do kind of use them now as the first thing I do is check my boundaries, because probably somebody has crossed one of my boundaries, or I've crossed one of theirs, and that's why that button is pushed. 9 times out of 10, it's a boundary violation. So it is a kind of just an alarm that says back up. look at what's real. And I just have to admit that I have taken a hammer to a smoke alarm in the middle of the night that was chirping. So yeah,
I'm sorry. That's
I
funny.
have done that because yeah, it's really annoying. But anyway, we have questions. We should get to questions.
All right, let's get to questions.
This was fascinating. So I hope we have questions about this. My adult children from a previous marriage have found out about my sex addicted husband's acting out. We are currently separating, and one of them is not willing to have a relationship with me any longer if I stay in the marriage. Any thoughts or suggestions? The sex addiction husband has just returned from inpatient intensive, and we are trying to navigate recovery and see where things will lead. So the child does not want to interact with the mother if she stays in the relationship.
Yeah, no, oh my, no, for sure. This, so this is going to be a little bit scattered, but if you're used to being on here with me, it probably, you're used to that, but
we get there eventually.
I'm going to take a couple of different angles because I think that there could be several things going on here. My initial thought when I read this was, wow, that is your child trying to tell you how betrayed they feel by what I'm going to assume is either their father or their stepfather, right? And so if it's a stepfather, I mean, I don't think it actually even matters. But either way, I think they're trying to tell you how betrayed they feel. And sadly, I think they're trying to do that by influencing you, which I think is unfortunate because now you're probably feeling quite trapped. I think my thought, if this were happening to me, I might try and say to my child, it sounds like you're really hurt or you're angry that I've been betrayed. And I really appreciate that. It actually sounds like you're trying to stand up for me, or you're trying to basically share or express your outrage and your pain. And that's wonderful because you need a space to be able to do that. However, we're really in some early stages of what's going on here. And I believe I owe it to myself to try and see what navigating through recovery would look like, especially after giving him an opportunity to have gone through intensive. And this is a decision that no matter what, I need to make for me. I can't make it for him. I can't make it for you. I can't make it for anybody else. I can't make it for God, if that's in your paradigm. I need to make this decision of whether I stay in the marriage or not. For me, if you feel that you can't be in a relationship with me any longer, I want to talk about that. Why do you feel that way? What is it that you're concerned about? And you might find out that they're scared that their kids aren't going to be protected because maybe they think that because they're a sex addict, they've got inappropriate behavior with children, which is just not the case. It could be the case, but it doesn't mean it's usually the case. I mean, they may have some misunderstandings as to what that even means. And so I would spend as much time trying to explore why they're going that route. And it might just be something as simple as, I'm so angry, and this is what I feel like you should do, that I'm going to put me as the bargaining piece of, are you going to choose me over him? And I think it's important to say, I don't want you to feel like I have to choose, that I'm choosing him over you. I just need to make whatever choice is best for me. And I hate that I now feel like your wounding is in a space that I have to make that choice. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how to explore that with them. Those would be my thoughts or ideas or suggestions, perhaps. Obviously, your situation is going to be uniquely yours. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, I just want to add that Matt and I have both seen so many relationships not only recover from sex addiction, but be better than ever, because intimacy opens up in a way that it never did before once the addict is in recovery. So you can end up with a fabulous marriage. It happens. Not every recovering relationship is better than ever, but it can happen. And it stinks that your child is inserting himself or herself, but it's also understandable with the anger, as Matt said, and wanting to protect you. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Addicts seem to have a lot of secret shame. Yes, we do. How is a betrayed partner supposed to talk to them on an adult level? Good. That's a good question. I found out my husband had a lot of anger at things he felt I had said and done throughout the relationship that he never told me. What's a partner to do if they don't speak up? That is a great question, and I've never heard it asked quite like that.
The truth is, yes, they have a lot of secret shame because they have developed addictive behavior. They also have developed the ability to be secret and isolated and disconnected. And so I would argue that they probably have more secret shame than those of us who aren't. And so you are absolutely correct. How's a betrayed partner supposed to talk to them on an adult level? Okay, so there's this small part of me that's like, oh my gosh, best question ever. Because the truth is, you're typically dealing with somebody who is operating on an emotionally, and I'm not intending shame by this, but oftentimes operating in an emotionally childlike level, because that's where they developed their addictive behavior. And so they learn to cope with childlike feelings and hurts and wounds and everything else using this addictive behavior. And so how are you going to talk to them on an adult level? Slowly, carefully, over a long period of time as they learn to heal and grow up. And I don't mean to sound rude. I think it's important as you are learning to stay on an adult level that you check in often. Hey, does it sound like I am coming from a parent? Do I sound like your mother or a mother figure? Do I sound like an authority figure? Oftentimes they're going to say yes. And they might say yes just to shut the conversation down and say, oh, well, I'm sorry that it feels that way. Can you tell me why it feels that way? And it might just be because you're asking questions, which, by the way, feels crazy because that's what adults do. We ask each other questions. We get curious with each other. We listen to each other. And so you might be doing everything really good and right. If you're trying to control their behavior, that's not okay. That's not adult level, right? If you are trying to understand them, if you're giving them boundaries, helping them understand your hurts and pains, you're staying on the adult level. But just because they feel like you're not in a peer role doesn't mean you aren't. But so I would check it in and I would start talking about those things.
Let me jump in for a second. I just want to say, I started my addictive behaviors in middle school, and I used my addictive behaviors to cope with emotions. And from that point on, my only coping mechanism was addiction of one form or another. So I didn't grow up. And then in my mid 30s, when I got sober, I was a seventh grader emotionally. And I reacted like a seventh grader emotionally. And that is normal for an addict. When we start our addiction, our emotional growth shuts down to a certain extent.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean, oh, well, you need to deal with it. You need to put up with it. It doesn't mean that at all. It means, okay, let's start growing up from seventh grade on. And that's why that's why we push people. You've got to learn to give up the addiction and start living a healthy life, because that's what adults do. And so it's terribly frustrating for a betrayed partner, because it's like, wow, I've been married emotionally to a child for however long, and I want to have an adult relationship.
Yeah, and then the addicts, in terms of not speaking up about, it sounds like he had some resentments that you found out about only recently, instead of when they happened. And that's a really common addict behavior too.
Oh my gosh.
I'd rather escape and pretend it's not happening than deal with it.
Well, a lot of times they use those resentments and that secret anger
Cool.
to fuel the behavior and to justify and make all sorts of excuses to keep living the way they're living. And it's not okay. And so you basically, you say, what's a partner to do if I think you're asking if the person struggling with addiction doesn't speak up. To be honest, you wait. You might ask, hey, is there anything that we needed, anything that has happened? Have I hurt you inadvertently? Can we talk about any secret shame or pain or hurt that's gone on? I'd really like to know. But the truth is, if they don't learn to speak up, then what do? You do the best you can and keep moving forward and find healing and take care of yourself and try to keep engaging in the relationship as best as possible. How does that sound, Scott?
I think it sounds great. Okay, so I want to get to this next question because I think it's kind of related. I rarely hear anything about a partner shame. I had a lot of childhood trauma, which I'm working on. However, why is everyone seemingly concentrating on the addict's shame when many partners have shame buttons from their childhoods too? We are both battling shame from families of origin. He just hasn't done the work to address his. How can we grow as a betrayed partner and addicted couple when we both have shame?
This is such a great question, and I actually love that you asked it the way you did. And let me actually explain from a Prodependent standpoint why. Because it used to be in the codependency model that we would focus on the partner's shame and the partner's family of origin right away. And in essence, pathologize the partner for even being in the relationship. And so one reason we are very careful to not go into the partner's shame or the partner's family of origin is because the partner needs to deal with all of the present trauma, or I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the present trauma before they can start to go in and go, hey, I've got shame too. I've got family of origin issues too. As long as the partner isn't saying, well, of course I'm married to an addict because I have this stuff from my history. Well, the truth is, regardless of the stuff from your history, you don't deserve how you've been treated. You don't deserve what's happened. And so we try to be very careful. You're right. You have shame. You have shame buttons. You've got family of origin issues. Why? Because we all do. And so we just have to be careful that we get past a lot of the betrayal stuff and work on the immediate trauma of the betrayal before we can start diving into a partner's shame and a partner's family of origin. Otherwise, it feels like we're almost blaming the partner. So we've learned through the codependency perspective to approach that at the right time.
Now, this doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge, when your shame button is pushed and you feel angry about it, we still acknowledge that, yes. But the Prodependence work tells you how to work through that in terms of the crisis. And then later, if you want to go back and explore your childhood, what we don't want to do with codependence will blame you and shame you, as Matt said, simply for being in relationship with an addict. They'll act like it's your fault, and it's not. And that's why we don't try to delve too much into your shame too early. When you want to do that work, a therapist is more than happy to do that with you. But we just don't ever want to confuse that work with the crisis of being betrayed, which is entirely different and not your fault. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I thought it was awesome. So I hope that answers the question. Ask more if either one of us didn't clarify that well enough. It's a wonderful question, and it speaks to exactly why we are pushing this codependency or Prodependence perspective, because a partner doesn't deserve the shame of being married to somebody who struggles with addiction just because you've done, like, as if you've done something wrong. You certainly, you typically, we don't know going into the relationship what we're married to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And being married to an addict doesn't mean you haven't brought things into this relationship from your childhood that you may want to work on. But those things are just separate from the betrayal.
Another reason why I don't like to jump into that in the beginning is it oftentimes can give fodder to the person struggling with an addiction to further blame or, not take accountability. So I like to hold off a little on that so that we can address the crisis and not create another opportunity to pass blame. So just there's some few ideas. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. How do you tell if a sex addict's behavior, lying, anger, defensiveness, selfishness, lack of empathy, etc., is due to shame or self-centered shallowness? Great question. I love it.
So now it really is a good question. I'm gonna split it apart just a little bit the way that I'm reading it. So what if, because of their shame, their behaviors, anger, lying, defensiveness, selfishness, lack of empathy, etc., because of their shame, it is self-centered shallowness, right? My answer is those are one and the same. Like, typically when we're in our shame, we are self-centered because we're completely focused on ourselves, because it's bringing up that much pain for ourselves. And you don't have to be an addict to have shame and be self-centered and shallow in moments. Now, I actually think that you're asking a much bigger question here, which really is almost like, once the shame is worked on and they're still self-centered and shallow, then what? And it's like, yeah, then potentially, I mean, this may sound terrible, then you have a self-centered shallow person, and you have to decide, can you live with that, or can they keep improving to where it gets better? But the truth is, I think in the beginning, when somebody's working on their shame, you can't tell if it's self-centered shallowness and that this person doesn't have the capacity to grow emotionally. You can't tell. It's too messy. It's only once shame reduction work has been done that you kind of get to a place of, oh, this is where this person is, and this is who they are, and am I okay with it?
I always think, and I'm curious what you think about this, but narcissistic personality disorder, which is a personality disorder in the DSM, and it's very self-centered, shallow. I need lots of validation, and I never think about you. And I mean, this is a real disorder.
Absolutely.
But I also see that's very difficult to deal with and live with. But I also see lots of people who look like they have narcissistic personality disorder who don't. What they have is a lot of shame, and their narcissistic behavior is manifesting as a coping mechanism.
Right.
And like you said, you kind of have to work through the layers to see where you really are with that person.
Absolutely. And there's lots of disorders that actually have this same issue, sex addiction, alcoholism. In fact, one that when I found this out as a clinician years and years ago, I was super curious about it, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it is not uncommon for somebody struggling with an eating disorder to have the same symptoms as borderline personality disorder. And when you clear up the eating disorder, those borderline symptoms also clear up.
Unless the person really is borderline.
Unless they are borderline. And so the question that was asked, I'm kind of taking it in that same perspective. Like, it is, if we are talking about narcissistic personality disorder, for instance, if we're talking about that, then as the addiction clears up and those behaviors change, the let's say narcissism may not clear up. But I see it all the time where it's like, wow, this guy, I mean, to be honest, early on, I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody's a narcissist. No, everybody's an addict. And I mean that by the population that I'm working with. and that I have to teach them how to overcome and work through this. And some of them, we'd get to the other side and we'd teach them how to manage their narcissism. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to change. It just, they learn to manage it. Other people, they actually change and you have a different person. I hope that makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, I look at myself in the mirror today and think back to who I was 25 years ago, and it's just like, who was that person? I can't believe I behaved like that.
Yeah.
I mean, why do people still talk to me? I mean, it's just, I look back and I was a horrible person. I mean, I behaved in horrible ways. I wasn't a horrible person, but I behaved horribly.
Yeah.
And it was shame and addiction and manifesting in horrible ways. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm not perfect now, by the way.
Right. Yeah. I think
I like the way you say that. Yeah, right. We know.
That's funny. I wanted to jump in and now I can't even remember exactly what I was going to jump in on.
Oh,
Good. What's good? No, you're fine. You're fine. I think you're hilarious.
Thank you. As a betrayed partner, I'm working on my Jungian shadow. I'm able to recognize my porn-addicted husband's shame when he starts defending and gets that "I know you are, but what am I?" argumentative tactic. I'm wondering if, by recognizing his shame, could my ability to see his shame really be me seeing my shadow in him? To clarify, am I really seeing my shame, my own shame, mirrored back to me?
This is such a good question, because I think it's really important for all of us at any time to ask ourselves, am I seeing, so I've had people say to me, "You're feeling shame." And I'm like, and I'll check it in and I'll be like, "I think I am." And they are telling me, "No, I can see it. The way you're acting, you're feeling shame." And that's a situation where, that I'm curious in those moments, are they feeling shame? There's been times where I'm nervous that somebody's feeling shame. And I have to recognize, you know what, that's me feeling my shame, projecting it onto them. So I think it's a really good thing to be aware of that exists. And I think by recognizing somebody else's shame, we can become more sensitive to our own. Can I answer if that's really you seeing your shadow in him? Great question. No, I can't answer it because you've got to figure that out. But I love the question itself because I think there's a self-awareness in the question that you are seeking. You're a seeker trying to figure out if that is true for you. Do I think it happens? Absolutely. Is it every time? I doubt it. But I think it's a great opportunity for you to take a look.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, with regards to codependence versus prodependence, isn't there some truth to the fact that the partner adapts and behaves in response over time to the addict and thus morphs personality-wise into something deeply affected by the addict's behavior and thus contributes to the dynamic as a whole? Why act as though they have zero bearing on the relationship as a whole?
This is also a good question. I have to be very careful with this response because we have to be careful. Like, it's one thing, it is very important, and you guys have heard me talk about this before. It's very important to recognize the patterns and the cycles of behavior within the relationship. And there is no doubt that we affect each other, right? And so I think it's really important that we start to learn about how we affect each other, even if this is a pattern that's been developed because of addiction in the relationship or trauma in somebody's previous life or whatever. The difference between like codependence versus codependence is basically telling the partner that they are as sick as the addict, if that makes sense. And I even hate saying, I hate even telling an addict, "You're sick," right? It's like telling a child, "Hey, you're sick. Something's wrong with you." The truth is, you didn't get the love, the nurture, the care, whatever it is you needed Now you got to learn to grow up and get the love and the care and the nurture that you need and leave those addicted ways behind you. It takes time and it's not easy. But I have to be careful because the way that, I don't want to say that the way that this is worded, it would be really easy to blame or shame a partner by saying, you are in this relationship, you add to the dynamic, and therefore you are responsible for the addiction. No, you are not responsible for the addiction. Every person, and I will say this, one reason I like this question is I remember recently I was suggesting to a partner that they have to be accountable for their part in the relationship. And the partner was really escalated by that statement of mine. It's like, I didn't cause this, I didn't do this. And that's true, but I'm not talking that you need to be accountable for your partner's, the addicted partner's behavior. I'm saying own your shame, own your judgment, own your pain, own your side of what's going on. So if I react poorly as a partner, I have to own, hey, you know what? My pain was coming up. I shouldn't have treated you that way. That wasn't okay. And I'm really sorry. You're important to me. I care about you. I need to own my mistake. I can't just say, well, I have a right to treat you poorly because of how much you've hurt me. That's not accountability. That's blame, right? So hopefully this breaks down that accountability is critical for anybody in any relationship, anywhere. Accountability is absolutely necessary. But what we're talking about as far as what we're being accountable for, Scott's got a cat tax right now.
A huge cat.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that surprised me. So what we're talking about is being accountable for. We don't want to send the message that, well, you're responsible for the addiction now too. No, you're not. You might be responsible for some of the unhealthy dynamics, or rather, you need to own some of the mistakes you've made, but we're not doing that in an effort to excuse the other person's mistakes. So accountability is necessary, but we just have to be careful on what that looks like so it doesn't feel like we're blaming either person.
Yeah, and codependence is what we call a trauma-based model. It looks at the partner, the caregiving loved one, the betrayed partner, whatever, as being in this relationship because their early life dysfunction has driven them into it. And until they deal with their early life dysfunction, they're always going to be in relationships like this. And that's just not the case, really. Prodependence, instead of looking at it that way, says you're in crisis right now because your partner's an addict. You've been betrayed. Things aren't going as promised. And you are going to behave erratically sometimes because that's how people in crisis behave. If your child has you find out your child has cancer, you're in crisis and you might start screaming at the doctor, the person who's trying to help, because you're in crisis and your lizard brain has kicked in. And this is why, partners do things that seem enmeshed and enabling and unproductive. And Prodependence just kind of backs away from all of that and says, hey, you know what? You're doing this because you love a person and your relationship with that person is threatened by a crisis. So of course you're behaving erratically. Let's take a step back and figure out what works and what doesn't work and move forward that way. It's just a different approach to doing the same work. When a betrayed partner comes in for Prodependence oriented treatment with Matt or Kim Buck, who works with Matt, it's about figuring out what's working and what's not working, and accepting that you're in a crisis that's not of your own making. So that helps.
Yeah, it's removing the blame and the shame, so much of it, but accountability is absolutely necessary in every relationship. So if I have somebody who's struggling to believe that their spouse has any accountability, meaning if I have somebody who struggles with addiction and they're like, well, this is all about me and it's all blaming me, and it's like, no, this isn't about that at all. We need to change your behavior and what's going on for you emotionally. But the truth is, your spouse is doing just as much work and healing as you are. But and it's just as critical for your spouse to heal and learn accountability as it is you. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, there was this book called Women Who Love Too Much.
Yeah, I remember
And,
that.
and it sounded really pathologizing. It's like there's something wrong with you because you love a person who's struggling. And
Right.
that's just ridiculous. But that's the codependence model. There's something wrong with you, and that's why you're in this relationship. And Prodependence says you can't love too much. There's nothing wrong with you for being in this relationship. Let's look at how you can do a better job of helping in this relationship.
Right.
You know, so um, I want to get to at least another question or two. I'm in a situation where I don't know if my husband is an addict, cheating, or if he is a narcissist. All of this is very new to me. I'm trying to see if I need to differentiate between the addict and the narcissist. I feel like they are the same person. And in the beginning, by the way, they pretty much look like the same person. Yeah.
Well, and it's tough because if you found out your spouse is cheating, somebody can be cheating and not necessarily be an addict, right? Addiction requires some other, compulsivity and loss of control and other things going on. Like, narcissism can occur without an addiction. If there is an addiction going on, or even if there's cheating, I mean, the truth is, a cheating spouse can be in so much shame and feel terrible about themselves, or blame and shame everybody else around them as a way of trying to deflect their own uh, error, if that makes sense. The tough part is that it would be difficult for you as a spouse to be able to figure out if they're an addict or not, right? Um, and in that sense, a narcissist or not. Like, one of the things I encourage everybody to do is, if you feel like it'd be helpful, look up some good books on narcissistic personality disorder. But you have to be careful because you can't heal them, right? You can't heal your partner either way. So what are you looking for? What is it that you're wanting? And I think more than anything, what's best, whether your spouse is a narcissist or not, is what tools do you need to learn in order to keep yourself in a healthy and safe place. And so I highly encourage you, I wouldn't focus on trying to diagnose him. I'd focus on trying to figure out how to stay sane in that circumstance. That's where I would focus all my effort, and I would encourage you to do the same. So you're right for thinking that they feel like the same person. In the meantime, while he sorts that out and you try, I would just focus on your healing and how to better manage yourself, whether you're living with an addict or a narcissist or a cheater or all three.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, be patient, protect yourself while he works on his stuff, and eventually you'll find out if he's an addict or just a cheater, or if there's narcissism, like as a real personality disorder kind of narcissism, or if it's going to go away. With addicts, the narcissistic seeming behavior, as recovery progresses, the level of narcissistic appearing behaviors tend to significantly diminish, unless the person really is a narcissist. But they kind of do. Recovery is this, and narcissism goes the other way.
Or the symptoms of narcissism.
Symptoms of narcissism. Yeah. So we have to be careful with that. So one quick one last. Can the treatment, such as full disclosure and polygraph for addicts, be the same treatment for helping a couple with a narcissist? Like a true narcissist or an appearing narcissist? Because I think that's two different questions.
Yeah, I mean, the treatment, such as full disclosure and polygraph, I don't know that that's I mean, what that's about is getting the secrets out, right? And having transparency. And so, is that going to be helping somebody that's a narcissist? No. Like, it's really just about getting transparency in the relationship, which needed to be occurring from the beginning of the relationship, or any relationship for that matter. So, full
But
disclosure.
it does help the addict's recovery to get all of that out
Oh,
and to become accountable and honest.
for sure, right? It
But a
it helps.
narcissist, yeah, it's not going to do much for a true narcissist.
Right. And so, so yeah, I mean, I hope that answers the question. I think even if the person is a narcissist, I think it's helpful to have a full disclosure and polys. I mean, those can be helpful, but as far as like getting rid of the narcissism, if they're a true narcissist, I don't think it's gonna help. Like, I think I'm answering that question properly.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And true narcissism is not really, you can't do much about it, can you? I mean, as a
Um,
therapist, I mean, you
it
can work with the person if they're willing, but true narcissists, I mean, they're just sort of not willing.
Right. Most of them aren't all that willing, but if somebody has a personality disorder and they're able to work on it, then they can learn to have healthier behavior. So I think a lot of it is really dependent on um, how well they respond to getting, getting help, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and I mean, the same could be said for addicts. We can work.
The same could be said for any of us, if
Yeah,
you think
this is
about it.
true.
Right?
Yeah,
Like, how much do we want help? I mean, I've seen reasonable people just say, I'm good. I'll live with what I got on my own. And it's like, okay, like, if you're comfortable where you're at, then stay where you're at.
cool. Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Great topic today, external and internal shame. I'll get it posted on our website if people want to revisit that part of it. It'll be posted probably tomorrow. Anything you want to say to take us out, Matt?
Nope. I just appreciate everybody showing up. So I guess I do. I appreciate everybody showing up and being vulnerable, and diving into some really hard places. Like, I love spending the time with you guys. So thank you. And I don't know if you want to copy and paste the last question. Maybe we could jump into that first next. But I would love to see you guys in a couple weeks.
Yeah, the program won't let me copy and paste out of there. It used to, and then it changed. So
Yeah,
save that question, bring it back next week, and I swear we'll get to it.
all right. We'll talk soon.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.